Moving right along with today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now into the next segment. The number 10 overall pick could be, in the end, decided by Aaron Rodgers. And, in saying that, looking back on last year with the Jets and Rodgers and the whole situation of how immediately they were thrusted into this Super Bowl contending team. They got Rodgers. They finally have a competent quarterback to lead this young, exciting team. They had a very impressive defense led by Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams and those guys. Offense, they had a young stud in Garrett Wilson showing out during his rookie year. They felt that they had to do something to maximize this talent. You managed to get Aaron Rodgers. You accommodated him by bringing in Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, Nathaniel Hackett as the offensive coordinator. Everything to make this transition go smoothly. And, of course, opening night against the Bills at home. It was all very emotional with the game being on 9/11. It all seemed to be going in this sort of movie-like cinematic way. You had Aaron Rodgers running out with the flag. Everything was gearing up to be this magical run. And then Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles, and it just destroys everything. The image that any Jets fans have of this sort of perfect season that could have been with Rodgers, it all just vanishes like that. With Aaron Rodgers' injury, then everything just gets thrown into looking towards next year. And you never wanted to come to that, but unfortunately it did. And now I think the biggest lesson that last year taught the New York Jets was that they have to maximize and not take for granted what they have with Aaron Rodgers and not just put it all on the quarterback. It is important. It's certainly the most important position on the field. But it just can't all be Rodgers. With him being 40 already, he's going to turn 41 in December. Not only did it teach them not to take this all for granted, but it taught them that with Zach Wilson in there, it looked way worse than it should have for a team that was supposed to be contending for a Super Bowl or at least the conference. It shouldn't have looked that bad as it did with only Aaron Rodgers going down. It looked extremely bad. The offensive line was banged up. The offense wasn't putting up points. The defense looked solid, but they couldn't do it all themselves, and everything just they got exposed a lot as the Super Bowl AFC contending team. They showed their flaws a lot more than people would have thought. And now leading into this year, they took it a lot more serious, leading into one of the best off seasons probably in my mind because of all the pieces they added. Mike Williams, Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, John Simpson, all on the offensive line except Mike Williams. You add him to Garrett Wilson. On the defensive side, you trade for Hassan Reddick. And now it looks like, just on the outside looking in, that, wow, the Jets addressed a lot of positions, almost all of them. How much more can you get better? You say that, you feel like that, and then you realize that the Jets still have a top 10 pick, number 10 to be exact, in the draft. And people have been rumored with thinking they're going to go defense, maybe pass rusher, maybe get another offensive weapon for Aaron Rodgers to really eliminate any excuse that he has about potentially playing well or being rustier and all of that. That's where this whole issue lies, and this main point comes to light with this number 10 overall pick. With how the top 10 is rounding out right now, you have about 4 or 5 teams that could be looking for quarterbacks. You look at the Bears, they're going to go one. The Commanders, the Patriots, potentially the Giants. You don't know where they fall right now, but the Patriots, Commanders, and Bears are all going to go quarterback. Then you have, say, Drake, or say you have J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix left over. You still have other teams in there that could still look for quarterback. Will they trade up into the top 10, overcrowding it even more with offense and quarterbacks specifically? Then you look at the Giants, the Chargers, and even the Bears at number 9 again. All have been heavily rumored with drafting wide receivers. How could Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze not be top 10 picks? So they all have to be jam-packed in there. They have to fit in there based on the evaluation on how people have them ranked. They're all top 10 talents, so it pushes players like Brock Bowers, a tight end position that's not so attractive just to the naked eye. You look at the receivers, quarterbacks, pass rushers are all offensive linemen for the Titans at 7. They're all looked at as more vital than the simple tight end. And no disrespect to tight ends, but that's just how it is. Even with a guy like Brock Bowers, generational type of talent at the tight end position, one of the most talked about prospects in recent memory, coming out of this draft, impressed everybody at Georgia and what he was able to do there. Won tight end of the year for the last 2 years, racked up all the accolades you need to garner this type of attention, and he might not make it into the top 10, which is crazy. Where now the Jets fall into this spot where could we just go best player available and take Brock Bowers, even though you might not necessarily need him on the offensive side of the ball when you've addressed wide receiver already? Breece Hall's looking great. You address the offensive line. Do you really need the best tight end? I'm sure it won't hurt. I know that, but it is interesting to think about because they could also go defensive line. Other than Hassan Reddick, they have Jermaine Johnson there as well. Quinnen Williams up the middle, but you need depth there at that position. Could you potentially trade back also to gain more picks? You need another corner outside of Sauce Gardner, maybe another safety as well. All these are questions that they have to answer, and something that a lot of people will think it'll fall on General Manager Joe Douglas, head coach Robert Saleh, but also potentially on Aaron Rodgers, according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. He suggested Bowers could be the pick if Rodgers deems it that it could be that way. If he decides, yeah, I want a tight end, yeah, I think it'll fit. I'm sure they're going to ask him. It's Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure it happens with all the other quarterbacks. They're going to ask him, and he could be ultimately what decides and what draws their hand on them drafting Brock Bowers. On that report, Jeremy Fowler said specifically, so he'll go fairly high in the first round, but he might not be that slam dunk top 10 player, mentioning Brock Bowers. A lot depends on the Jets because they've got Aaron Rodgers. They are all in. They are all in for 2024. So if they're doing the long play, they might like to take an offensive tackle or something that is not as sexy and play for the long future. But they're all in now. So if Rodgers wants a tight end, he might get his guy. I'm almost getting sick of using the term all in. I think everyone's overused it. In all honesty, a lot this year. I just recently saw, before I came on here, Jerry Jones said it again, that they're all in on the draft. Now Jeremy Fowler's saying it about Aaron Rodgers. I think it's getting very, very much overused this offseason. But as opposed to the Cowboys, what Aaron Rodgers and the Jets are doing now, they're actually living up to that phrase all in. With if they go Brock Bowers, that is surely the team that is going all in this offseason with everything they've done. They've addressed almost everything like I mentioned before. And it's almost like, you know what, it's almost like that meme you see on social media sometimes, tell me you're this without actually telling me you're this. Show me that or tell me that you're all in without telling me you're all in. The Jets epitomize that meme. That just popped into my head thinking about it. They epitomize that meme perfectly. That fits them perfectly because they've actually done it. And then with Brock Bowers potentially going there and Aaron Rodgers maybe being asked about it, I'm sure it's going to draw some split decisions within the organization about going offensive tackle because you don't want to completely strip this down and be left with nothing. After Aaron Rodgers departs, that could be in a year, 2, 3 maybe. It's not going to be that much longer. So I do understand what they mean by playing it out for the future. But in all honesty, where I stand on it, and if I believe this sort of report, I think it would be true. And I think Aaron Rodgers would just say go Brock Bowers because I know, or I assume I know, that Aaron Rodgers knows that his career is closer to the end than the start, certainly. So he only has that one Super Bowl. As much as he wants to say that doesn't bother him, I'm sure at some point, to some extent, he's feeling that he is one of the greats. His talent has shown that. He's shown that. I'm sure he'll say you have nothing to prove, but to have only one Super Bowl, I know he wants to get there again. Why not draft somebody that'll help you add to that? Someone you can build a connection with, and maybe, who knows, extend your playing career a few more years if you have that reliable position to throw to, specifically a tight end. Tight ends are more often than not the quarterback's best friend because of where they line up, how close they are, short, intermediate routes. Gronk, you think of Gronk and Tom Brady, Mahomes and Kelsey, Phillips and Antonio Gates. That just seems to be the pattern. If you could build something like that, close to something like that, with Brock Bowers, who is touted to be this great tight end prospect, it could extend Rodgers' period with the Jets, and that only benefits the Jets, benefits Rodgers playing longer, and the Jets have more of a window now to plan out that future that they want to talk about post Aaron Rodgers. And General Manager Joe Douglas also held his pre-draft press conference last week on Friday morning and stated that the top 10 pick provides them with great flexibility. Those were his words. And if they do draft a tight end and it turns out anything like Kelsey, like I mentioned, the Chiefs with Kelsey, I meant George Kittle, and the Detroit Lions most recently with Sam Laporta, he said that they're real dynamic weapons on offense. So it looks and sounds like he's not pushing the idea away. It sounds like he's open to it. And just continuing on with this idea that some people might bring up on the opposite side of this argument, oh, they're only drafting Brock Bowers because they want to please Aaron Rodgers for some reason and just accommodate him with everything. That may be true, but why wouldn't you do that with Aaron Rodgers and how much you put on his shoulders to depend on how successful this organization is? Why wouldn't he be making decisions like this? Why wouldn't you try to make it as easy as possible for Aaron Rodgers? And it's not like this would be the first time they're doing this. I mentioned Nathaniel Hackett before, Alan Lazard, Randall Cobb. All of them have already come in to try and accommodate Aaron Rodgers to some extent. Why not continue it with a young, talented, generational type of player in Brock Bowers? For all the reasons I mentioned prior. And it's similar to a Lamar or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, who I'm sure their organizations are talking to them, getting some information from them, some feedback on who to draft. I mentioned before, I know I talked about it before with John Harbaugh, asking Lamar what he thinks, really being involved with that. I'm sure Patrick Mahomes is talking with Brett Veach, Andy Reid on what wide receiver potentially to take in the first round. I know Josh Allen is giving his input on any sort of receiver that he wants to throw the ball to be his number one guy. All the other quarterbacks do it. It's a lot more common. And if the Jets decide to go this way, I think I would side with them. It would extend Aaron Rodgers a bit longer. I truly believe that. And it'll help the Jets really just put up points on offense. That's really what it's all about nowadays in the NFL. Their defense is good enough as it is to come up with a couple stops during the game, keep teams to under 22, 21 points. If they're able to do that and they have this offense, I don't think they'll struggle or really have any problems winning games, rebounding from last year. It's looking good. Now, the number 10 pick is going to be a big, pivotal piece to how the rest of this offseason goes and how they built out the remainder of their roster. But they're on good pace. I'm a fan of what they're doing. We're just going to have to see what they decide to do here in a few days. But in the meantime, we will continue on with today's show. 2 more topics coming on down the pipe. I mentioned before the Chargers and what they're looking for in a trade. We're going to get their general manager's thoughts on that, as well as talking any updates on the Falcons and the Eagles tampering situation that has been lingering since the start of the new league year. Stick around. We're going to get into those stories after this quick break. Don't go anywhere.